She came back from her Christmas party, smiling, coat still on, phone face down in her hand. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, practiced, careful, like she'd rehearsed it in the car. Nira always was good at performance art. I said nothing. Just sat there at our kitchen island, nursing my third cup of coffee, watching her navigate around me like I was furniture. The house felt different when she walked in. Colder, somehow. Maybe it was the December wind following her through the door, or maybe it was something else entirely. I unlocked my tablet and placed it on the granite counter, already open to the home camera timeline she forgot synced to my account. The screen glowed between us like evidence waiting to testify. "How was the party?" I asked, keeping my voice level. 38 years old, and I'd finally learned the value of staying calm when the world starts cracking apart. "Oh, you know how these things are." Nira hung her coat on the hook by the door, movements just a little too casual. Boring speeches, terrible wine, everyone complaining about their workload. She moved toward the stairs, probably planning to disappear into the bedroom and wash away whatever evidence might be clinging to her. But I'd already done my homework. My first move was confirmation. I scrubbed to the time window on the tablet, clipped the entry logs from our smart doorbell, and matched them to rideshare receipts pulled from our shared inbox. The timestamps told a story she hadn't planned on sharing. I saved the clips, exported the metadata, and backed everything to a secure folder she didn't know existed. 20 years in tech project management teaches you to document everything, every meeting, every decision, every lie that comes back to bite you later. I'd applied those same skills to my marriage without even realizing it. "Lennon?" Nira's voice carried a note of uncertainty. She'd noticed the tablet, the focused way I was staring at the screen instead of her. I looked up. Just checking the security feeds. You know how paranoid I get about leaving the house empty? That wasn't entirely untrue. I had checked the feeds, just not for burglars. Nira tried to laugh it off, that nervous little giggle she used when caught in small lies about spending or forgotten anniversaries. "You and your gadgets. Sometimes I think you trust those cameras more than people." "Cameras don't lie," I said. The silence stretched between us like a wire pulled tight. Nira shifted her weight from one foot to the other, phone still clutched in her hand like a lifeline. "I should change clothes," she said finally. "This dress is driving me crazy." I nodded and showed her one still frame from the tablet. Her getting into a black Audi that definitely wasn't a company car. The timestamp showed 6:47 p.m., exactly when she'd texted me that the party was starting. Her face went through a series of micro-expressions, confusion, recognition, then something that might have been panic, before she locked it down. "What is this?" she asked, but her voice had changed. Smaller now, defensive. She reached for her phone, probably to call someone. Harris, most likely. I disabled the Wi-Fi with a swipe on my tablet, then handed her a printed summary, timestamps, locations, and the complete guest list she'd named earlier that night when I'd asked about the party. "Your story stopped working," I said. The paper shook slightly in her hands as she read. I'd been thorough. Entry and exit times from our house, the Audi's license plate, which belonged to Harris McCoy from her office, the restaurant they'd gone to instead of any Christmas party, even the hotel receipt that had somehow ended up in our shared email, Harris's credit card, but sent to her address. "You've been spying on me," she said, but it came out weak. Accusatory but without real conviction. "I've been paying attention," I corrected. "There's a difference." Nira straightened, trying to recover some ground. "This is exactly the kind of controlling behavior that what?" I interrupted. "That makes you cheat? That makes you lie to my face every night for 3 months? That makes you come home from screwing your coworker and ask me how my day was?" She threatened to leave then, said she couldn't live with someone who didn't trust her, someone who would violate her privacy like this. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been saving them up. I nodded and slid the separation draft across the table. 20 pages of legal documentation I'd spent the last week preparing with my attorney. The clause covering misrepresentation and overnight absences was highlighted in yellow. I figured you might say that, I told her, so I made it easy for you. Her eyes scanned the first page, and I watched the color drain from her face. I had already booked a temporary move-out arrangement for her and transferred utilities back to my name. The joint accounts were frozen pending legal review. Her car lease, which I'd been paying, would terminate at the end of the month. "You can't do this," she whispered. "Actually, I can. It's all legal. My lawyer checked twice." I stood up, collected my keys from the counter, and walked to the front door. She followed, still clutching the separation papers. "Lennon, wait. We can talk about this. We can work it out." I turned back to look at her. Really look at her. The woman I'd married 8 years ago who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and steal fries from my plate. When had she become this stranger standing in my hallway? "The locks get changed tomorrow morning," I said. "Your things will be packed and waiting at your sister's house by noon. The timeline is complete, Nira. The exit is already scheduled." I locked the door behind me and sat in my car for a long moment, engine running, heat blasting against the December cold. Through the window, I could see her silhouette moving frantically around the house, probably trying to call Harris on a connection that no longer worked. I emailed the complete packet to my attorney before midnight, copying myself and saving everything to 3 different cloud services. The smile she'd walked in with was long gone by the time I pulled out of the driveway, but mine was just getting started. The next morning hit like a hangover without the fun of drinking. I woke up in a hotel room that smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and regret, staring at a ceiling that had probably witnessed 1,000 other people's worst nights. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Nira and 43 text messages that ranged from apologetic to furious to desperate. I deleted them without reading past the first few words. Some conversations are over before they start. The locksmith was already at the house when I arrived at 8 a.m. Professional guy, didn't ask questions, just did the work. By 8:30, every entry point had new hardware, and I was the only one with keys. I'd learned that trick from my friend Shawn, who'd spent 15 years as a cop before becoming a private investigator. Speaking of Shawn, he was waiting in my kitchen when I walked in, coffee already brewing, looking like he'd been there for hours. "Rough night?" he asked, taking in my wrinkled clothes and probably obvious exhaustion. "Getting better by the minute." I poured myself a cup and sat across from him at the island. "Thanks for coming." "You said you needed help with something delicate. I figured it wasn't about your computer." Shawn Davis had the kind of face that inspired confessions, weathered but kind, with gray eyes that missed nothing. We'd been friends since college, back when he was studying criminal justice, and I was deep into computer science. Different paths, same destination, dealing with people who thought they were smarter than they actually were. I handed him a folder containing everything I'd compiled on Nira and Harris. Photos, receipts, timeline documentation, even some social media posts that painted a very different picture than the one she'd been showing me. Shawn flipped through it methodically, occasionally raising an eyebrow or making small notes in the margins. Professional habits die hard. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. "Suspected for about 2 months. Confirmed for 1 week. Last night was just the final presentation." "This is solid work, Lennon. Thorough. You could probably get everything you want in the divorce with this." I nodded. "That's the plan. But I want to know more about Harris McCoy. What kind of man goes after a married woman? What kind of person he really is when nobody's watching?" Shawn closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. "You want me to investigate him?" "I want to understand what I'm dealing with. Nira's not stupid. Reckless, maybe, but not stupid. She chose him for a reason. I need to know what that reason was." And then what? I'd been asking myself that same question all night. The divorce would handle the legal aspects, but there was something else burning in my chest, Not quite anger, not quite hurt. Something colder and more focused. Then I make sure they both understand the consequences of their choices. Shawn studied my face for a long moment. You're not talking about anything illegal, are you? Nothing illegal, nothing violent, just educational. He laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Educational. Right. You know, in my experience, people who cheat usually have other secrets, other vulnerabilities. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting them destroy themselves. Sometimes they need help getting started. My phone buzzed with another call from Nira. I declined it and added her number to my blocked list. Whatever she had to say could go through lawyers now. Shawn spent the next hour walking through the house, checking the new locks, examining the security system, making sure everything was properly documented. He had a methodical way of working that reminded me why he'd been such a good cop. Your camera system is impressive, he said, reviewing the footage on my main computer. Most people don't realize how much their smart home devices actually record. Most people don't marry someone who lies for a living. HR director, right? Yeah, they're trained to manage information, control narratives. She probably thought she was being careful. I pulled up another folder on my computer, this one containing Nira's work emails that had been syncing to our shared family account. She'd forgotten about that connection months ago, but I hadn't. Look at this, I said, pointing to a thread between Nira and Harris that went back 4 months. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning something at work. Shawn read over my shoulder, his expression growing more serious with each message. Harris worked in sales for a competing firm, and the emails suggested he'd been getting inside information about upcoming contracts and client strategies. Corporate espionage, Shawn said quietly. That's a felony. That's leverage. I printed out the most incriminating messages and added them to a new folder. Nira had been feeding Harris confidential information about her company's biggest clients, helping him undercut their bids and steal contracts. The affair wasn't just personal. It was professional sabotage. This changes things, Shawn said. You're not just dealing with a cheating wife anymore. You're dealing with criminals. My phone rang again, this time from an unknown number. I answered it. Lennon, it's me, Nira's voice, calling from somewhere else. We need to talk. No, we don't. Talk to my lawyer. Please, just listen. I can explain everything. Harris and I, it's not what you think. I looked at Shawn, who was shaking his head and making a cut-it-off gesture with his hand. Actually, Nira, I think it's exactly what I think. In fact, I think it's worse than what I think. What do you mean? Check your work email, then call your boss, then call a lawyer who specializes in corporate fraud. I hung up and turned off my phone. The next few hours were going to be very interesting for Mrs. Nira Braskin and Mr. Harris McCoy. Shawn was already making notes in a small notebook he carried everywhere. You want me to dig deeper into Harris's background? Everything you can find. Financial records, employment history, other relationships. I want to know if this is a pattern or if my wife was just special. And Nira? I looked around the house we'd shared for 8 years. The kitchen where we'd planned our future, the living room where we'd watched movies and talked about having kids someday, the bedroom where she'd lied to my face every night for months. Nira's going to learn that actions have consequences, and that some people don't forget as easily as she thinks they do. By noon, the first domino had fallen. Nira's boss, Eli Peterson, called my phone directly, a number he shouldn't have had unless someone was already panicking. Mr. Braskin, this is Eli Peterson from Meridian Solutions. I believe we need to talk. I let him sweat for a moment before responding. About what, Mr. Peterson? About some irregularities we've discovered in our client communications. Irregularities that seem to involve your wife. Soon-to-be ex-wife, I corrected. And I'm not sure how I can help you with your internal business matters. Perhaps we could meet somewhere private this afternoon? I agreed to meet him at Gina's bar on Main Street, a place where conversations got lost in the ambient noise of day drinkers and people avoiding their own problems. Gina Martinez had been running the place for 15 years, and she knew how to mind her own business when it mattered. The bar was exactly what you'd expect from a New England town, trying to convince itself it was still thriving. Dark wood, long-time locals nursing beers that cost less than coffee, and a jukebox that hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. Gina herself stood behind the bar, a woman in her 50s who'd seen enough drama to write a book, but was wise enough to keep most of it to herself. Eli Peterson looked like every other corporate middle manager I'd ever met. Expensive suit, nervous energy, and the kind of soft handshake that suggested he'd never done physical work in his life. He was already waiting in a corner booth when I arrived, a untouched beer sweating on the table in front of him. "Thank you for coming," he said as I sat down. "This is a very delicate situation. Most situations involving my wife tend to be." Gina appeared at our table without being summoned, the way good bartenders do. "What can I get you?" "Whiskey. Something that doesn't pretend to be smooth." She nodded and disappeared. Eli watched her go, probably wondering if she was listening to our conversation. She was, of course, but that was part of the service. "Mr. Braskin, I'm going to be direct with you. We have evidence that Nira has been sharing confidential client information with someone outside our company. Information that has cost us several major contracts. That sounds like a problem for you and your lawyers. The person she's been sharing information with is Harris McCoy from Pinnacle Sales Group. We believe they've been working together to undermine our business relationships. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories." Gina returned with my whiskey, something brown and honest that burned in all the right ways. I took a sip and studied Eli's face. He was scared, but not just of the business implications. There was something personal in his expression. "Why are you telling me this instead of calling the police?" I asked. "Because we'd prefer to handle this quietly. Corporate litigation is expensive and public, bad for everyone involved." "Everyone except the people who got cheated." Eli shifted uncomfortably. "We're prepared to offer Nira a severance package in exchange for her resignation and a non-disclosure agreement. No criminal charges, no public scandal." I finished my whiskey and signaled Gina for another. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Peterson. Almost suspiciously generous." "What do you mean?" "I mean that most companies don't offer golden parachutes to employees who commit corporate espionage. Unless, of course, those employees know something that could embarrass the company even more than their theft." The color drained from Eli's face. Bingo. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Nira's smart, but she's not smart enough to pull off a scheme like this alone. She had help from someone inside your company, someone with access to information she couldn't get on her own." Eli's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his beer. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious situation. The question is, what's it worth to you to keep it quiet?" We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken truths settling between us like smoke. Gina had moved to the other end of the bar, giving us privacy while keeping one eye on our table. She'd probably seen this exact conversation 100 times before. "What do you want?" Eli asked finally. "I want Nira gone. No severance, no references, no soft landing. I want her professional reputation destroyed so thoroughly that she'll never work in HR again." "And in exchange?" "In exchange, I keep my theories about inside help to myself. Your other secrets stay buried." Eli nodded slowly. "That can be arranged." "Good. And one more thing. I want Harris McCoy's employment history. Every company he's worked for, every reference, every performance review. If he's done this before, I want to know about it. I can't just, sure you can. You have connections. Make some calls. Ask around. I'm sure other companies would be very interested to know if they've been hiring corporate spies. I left $20 on the table and stood up. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. After that, I take everything I know to the state attorney general and let them sort it out. Outside, the December air felt sharp and clean after the smoky atmosphere of the bar. I sat in my car for a few minutes, letting the heater warm up while I processed what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Shawn. Found something interesting about Harris. Can you meet me at your place in an hour? I drove home through streets that looked different now that I wasn't sharing them with Nira. The house felt larger, quieter, like it was finally able to breathe again. Shawn was waiting in the driveway, a thick folder in his hand, and an expression that suggested he'd found more than he'd expected. Harris McCoy is a piece of work, he said as we settled in the kitchen. 3 previous jobs, 2 previous affairs with married coworkers, and 1 very interesting pattern. He spread photos and documents across the counter like evidence in a trial. He targets women in HR or administrative positions, women with access to sensitive information, works his way into their confidence, starts an affair, then uses the relationship to steal business intelligence. So Nira wasn't special. She was just the latest mark. Gets better. His last affair ended when the woman's husband found out and reported everything to her company. Harris disappeared overnight, left her to face the consequences alone. She lost her job, her marriage, and her professional reputation. Last I heard, she was working retail in another state. I studied the photos. Harris with different women, always the same pattern. Expensive dinners, hotel rooms, the gradual corruption of trust and loyalty. Nira had been played by a professional. There's more, Shawn continued. Harris has been living beyond his means for years. Expensive car, high-end apartment, designer clothes. His salary at Pinnacle doesn't come close to covering his lifestyle. So he's desperate. Desperate and experienced, which makes him dangerous. I leaned back in my chair, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. He's not just stealing information for competitive advantage, he's selling it, probably to multiple buyers. That's what I'm thinking. And if Nira figured that out, she'd either want a bigger cut, or she'd try to back out entirely. My phone rang. Another unknown number. I answered it cautiously. Lennon? A man's voice this time, smooth and confident. This is Harris McCoy. I think we should meet. Harris McCoy chose the meeting place, a coffee shop downtown that catered to the kind of people who paid $6 for drinks with unpronounceable names. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was trying to control the narrative, pick neutral ground where he felt comfortable. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table near the back, somewhere I could watch the entire room. Shawn had offered to come along, but this was something I needed to handle alone. Some conversations require a personal touch. Harris walked in exactly on time, scanning the room like he was looking for threats. He was shorter than I'd expected from the surveillance photos, maybe 5'8", with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that suggested he spent more time in front of mirrors than most people. Designer jeans, expensive sweater, shoes that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. He spotted me immediately. I was the only person in the place wearing a simple button-down shirt and looking like I belonged in the real world instead of a lifestyle magazine. Lennon Braskin? He extended his hand as he approached. Harris McCoy, thanks for agreeing to meet. I didn't shake his hand, just gestured to the chair across from me. You said we needed to talk. Talk. Harris sat down, his confidence flickering slightly. He'd probably expected anger, shouting, maybe even violence. Instead, he got the same tone I used in business meetings when someone was about to get terminated. Look, I know this is an awkward situation, he began, but I think we can work something out that benefits everyone. Everyone meaning you and Nira? Everyone meaning all 3 of us. See, the thing is, Nira and I never meant for this to happen. It just developed naturally. 2 people working closely together, shared interests. You know how these things go. I sipped my coffee and waited. In my experience, Guilty people can't stand silence. They fill it with explanations that usually make things worse. The point is, Harris continued, we're adults here. We can handle this maturely. No need for lawyers or messy public scenes. Nira wants to make a clean break, start fresh. I'm sure you want the same thing. What I want, I said slowly, is to understand what kind of man seduces another man's wife and then has the nerve to call it a business meeting. Harris's smile tightened. I didn't seduce anyone. Nira made her own choices. About the affair? Maybe. About stealing corporate secrets and feeding them to you? That was your idea. The coffee shop suddenly felt quieter. Harris glanced around, probably wondering who might be listening. A few college students with laptops, an elderly couple sharing a pastry, nobody who looked like law enforcement. But his paranoia was showing. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. I pulled out my phone and opened the email thread I'd forwarded to myself. Meridian Solutions client list, updated quarterly projections, internal strategy documents, all sent from Nira's work account to your personal email, all time-stamped and documented. Harris leaned forward, trying to read the screen. That doesn't prove anything. It proves enough, especially when combined with Pinnacle's sudden success in winning contracts they shouldn't have known about. Business is competitive. Sometimes you get lucky. Luck. I put my phone away and studied his face. Is that what you called it with Jennifer Walsh at Morrison Industries? Or Sandra Chen at TechFlow Solutions? Just lucky coincidences? Harris went very still. Those names meant something to him. Previous victims, previous schemes. Shawn's research had been thorough. I don't know what you think you know. I know you're a professional. This isn't your first time manipulating a married woman into betraying her employer. It's just the first time you've been caught by someone who understands how to document evidence. A college student at the next table looked over, probably picking up on the tension in our conversation. Harris noticed and lowered his voice. What do you want? He asked. I want you to disappear. Leave town. Leave Nira alone. Find some other city where people don't know what you are. And if I don't? I smiled for the first time since he'd sat down. Then I make sure everyone knows exactly what you are. Starting with your boss at Pinnacle, moving on to the state attorney general, and finishing with a very detailed post on every professional networking site I can find. Harris tried to look defiant, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. You can't prove any of this in court, he said finally. I don't need to prove it in court. I just need to prove it to your next employer, and the one after that, and every woman you try this with in the future. You're threatening me. I'm educating you. There's a difference. Harris stood up abruptly, knocking his untouched coffee across the table. The liquid spread toward my side, but I didn't move. Just watched him struggle to maintain composure while his carefully constructed world started falling apart. This isn't over, he said. Yes, it is. You just don't realize it yet. He walked out without looking back, moving fast like he was being chased. Through the window, I watched him climb into his black Audi and drive away with the kind of aggressive acceleration that suggested panic. I cleaned up the spilled coffee with napkins the barista brought over, apologizing for the mess. She shrugged and said it happened all the time, which made me wonder what kind of conversations usually took place in this particular coffee shop. My phone buzzed with a text from Shawn. How did it go? Phase 1 complete, I typed back. Time for Phase 2. I drove home slowly, taking the long way through downtown. The Christmas decorations were already up. Lights strung between street lamps, wreaths on every storefront, the kind of seasonal cheer that felt hollow when your personal world was collapsing. But my world wasn't collapsing anymore. It was rebuilding itself, piece by piece, into something cleaner and more honest than what I'd had before. At home, I found a package waiting on my doorstep. No return address, but I recognized Eli Peterson's handwriting on the label. Inside was a thick manila envelope containing Harris McCoy's complete employment history, just as I'd requested. The documents painted a picture of a man who'd been running the same con for years. 3 companies, 3 affairs, 3 instances of stolen information leading to lost contracts and ruined careers. Always the women who paid the price, while Harris moved on to the next opportunity. But not this time. I spread the documents across my kitchen table and started making a list of phone numbers. Former employers, former victims, current competitors. People who deserved to know what Harris McCoy really was. My phone rang. Nira again, calling from yet another number. "Lennon, please. We need to talk about this rationally." "There's nothing rational about what you've done, Nira. But there's going to be something very logical about what happens next. Harris said you threatened him. Harris said a lot of things to you over the past few months. How much of it turned out to be true?" Silence on the other end. Finally. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I don't want anything from you anymore. That's the point. The separation papers, some of these terms, are exactly what you agreed to when you decided to cheat on me and commit corporate espionage. Actions have consequences, Nira. You're about to learn that lesson very thoroughly." I hung up and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to ensure that justice was served in all the right ways. But tonight, for the first time in months, I was going to sleep peacefully in my own house, in my own bed, without wondering what lies were being whispered in the dark. The next morning brought news that was better than coffee and more satisfying than revenge. Eli Peterson called at exactly 9 a.m. with an update that made everything worth it. "Nira's been terminated," he said without preamble. "Security escorted her out 20 minutes ago." "And Harris?" "Pinnacle Sales fired him yesterday afternoon. Apparently someone sent them a very detailed report about his employment history and current activities." I smiled into the phone. "Someone with good research skills, I imagine." "Very good. The State Attorney General's office has also opened an investigation into corporate espionage. Multiple companies have come forward with similar complaints about Harris McCoy." "How many companies?" 7 so far. It seems your friend has been busy for quite some time." 7 companies, 7 schemes, 7 women whose lives had been damaged by Harris McCoy's greed and manipulation. But this time was different. This time, someone had fought back. After hanging up with Eli, I drove to Gina's bar for lunch and found the place buzzing with conversation. Small towns thrive on gossip, and the story of Nira Braskin's dramatic fall from grace was exactly the kind of scandal that kept people talking for months. Gina herself was behind the bar, polishing glasses and listening to the conversations swirling around her. She nodded when I walked in, the kind of acknowledgement that suggested she knew more about recent events than she was letting on. "Whiskey?" she asked as I took a seat at the bar. "Just coffee, and maybe some information." She poured coffee from a pot that had probably been brewing since dawn. "What kind of information?" "The kind that helps a man understand how quickly news travels in a town like this." Gina leaned against the bar, studying my face. "News travels fast when it's interesting. Faster when it's about people who thought they were better than everyone else." Nira thought she was better than everyone else? Nira thought she was smarter than everyone else. There's a difference. Smart people learn from their mistakes. People who think they're smart just make bigger mistakes. A woman at the end of the bar looked over. Mrs. Wolcott from my neighborhood. The kind of elderly busybody who knew everyone's business before they knew it themselves. She'd been watching me since I walked in, probably storing up details for future conversations. "Mr. Braskin," she called out, "I heard about your troubles. Such a shame when marriages don't work out." I nodded politely. "Thank you for your concern, Mrs. Wolcott." Of course, some people bring their troubles on themselves. All that running around, staying out late. A woman should know better. The entire bar had gone quiet, everyone listening to see how I'd respond. Small-town drama at its finest. Public judgment disguised as sympathy. Some people make choices, I agreed, and some people live with the consequences. Mrs. Wolcott smiled, the expression of someone who'd just heard exactly what she wanted to hear. Well said indeed. The conversations resumed, but I could feel the undercurrent of satisfaction in the room. Nira had never been particularly popular in town, too polished, too concerned with appearances, too quick to look down on people she considered beneath her social status. Her downfall was being received as a form of community justice. My phone buzzed with a text from Shawn. Harris is packing. Saw him loading boxes into his car an hour ago. I finished my coffee and left money on the bar. Outside, the December air was sharp and clean, carrying the promise of snow. I drove to Harris's apartment complex, a modern development that tried too hard to look expensive and ended up looking cheap instead. Shawn was right. Harris was loading boxes into his Audi, moving with the frantic energy of someone trying to escape before the walls closed in completely. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. The stress was showing. I parked across the street and watched. No confrontation this time, no dramatic speeches, just documentation. I took photos with my phone, noting the time and date, creating a record of Harris McCoy's hasty departure from town. He saw me eventually, looked up from loading a box, and spotted my car. For a moment we stared at each other across the distance. Then he slammed his trunk closed, got in his car, and drove away without looking back. I followed at a distance, curious about his destination. He drove to the highway, took the ramp heading south, and disappeared into traffic, probably heading for another town, another job, another opportunity to reinvent himself as someone worth trusting. But this time would be different. This time, his reputation would follow him. I'd spent the morning making phone calls to Harris's previous victims, sharing information and coordinating responses. 3 of them were filing complaints with law enforcement. 2 were pursuing civil litigation. All of them were grateful that someone had finally connected the dots and exposed the pattern. Back at home, I found Nira's car in my driveway, and Nira herself sitting on my front steps, looking smaller and more defeated than I'd ever seen her. Her designer clothes were rumpled, her makeup smeared, her usual confidence completely gone. "The locks are changed," I said as I got out of my car. "You can't get in." "I know. I've been waiting for you. We don't have anything to talk about." She stood up, unsteady on her high heels. "Lennon, please. I lost my job. Harris is gone. I have nowhere to go." "You have your sister's house. That was always the plan." "My sister won't take me in. Not after everything that's come out." I walked past her to my front door, key ready. "That sounds like a problem you should have considered before you decided to cheat on me and commit corporate espionage. I never meant for any of this to happen." I turned to look at her. "You never meant to get caught. There's a difference." "Harris said it would be easy, just some information, nothing that would really hurt anyone. He said we could be together, start fresh somewhere new." "And you believed him?" "I wanted to believe him. I wanted something different, something exciting. Our marriage had become so routine." "Routine." I repeated the word, tasting its implications. "You threw away 8 years of marriage because you were bored." "It wasn't just boredom. I felt invisible, like I was just going through the motions of being alive." I unlocked my door and stepped inside, then turned back to face her. "Now you know what invisible actually feels like. The difference is, you chose it." "Lennon, wait." I closed the door and engaged the new locks. Through the window, I watched her stand there for a long moment, before finally walking back to her car and driving away. My phone rang almost immediately. Unknown number again. "This is Nira. I'm calling from my car." "I know. I can see you." "I need you to know that I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. Not just because I got caught, but because I hurt you. Apology noted. Is there any chance, any possibility that we could work through this? Go to counseling, try to rebuild what we had? I looked around the house we'd shared, the life we'd built together, the future we'd planned that would never happen now. No, I said. There's no chance at all. Because you can't forgive me? Because I don't want to forgive you. Because some things can't be fixed, and some people don't deserve second chances. I hung up and blocked her new number. Through the window, I watched her car disappear down the street, taking with it the last remnant of a life that had been built on lies I'd been too trusting to see. But that life was over now, and the new one, the honest one, was just beginning. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in the same booth at Gina's bar where I'd met with Eli Peterson, but this time the conversation was purely social. Shawn sat across from me, updating me on the final pieces of the Harris-McCoy investigation. Federal charges were filed yesterday, he said, sliding a newspaper across the table. Wire fraud, conspiracy, theft of trade secrets. He's looking at 5 to 10 years if convicted. The headline read, "Local man charged in multi-state corporate espionage scheme." Below it was Harris's booking photo. Gone were the designer clothes and confident smile, replaced by an orange jumpsuit and the hollow expression of someone whose carefully constructed world had finally collapsed. What about the other women? I asked. 3 of them are testifying for the prosecution. The others are pursuing civil suits. Turns out Harris had been running this same scam for almost a decade, moving from city to city, company to company. And Nira? Cooperating witness. She's providing testimony about the scheme in exchange for reduced charges, probably looking at probation and community service. I nodded, feeling a satisfaction that was deeper than simple revenge. Justice wasn't just being served, it was being served systematically, thoroughly, with the kind of precision that ensured Harris-McCoy would never have the opportunity to destroy another marriage or another career. Gina appeared at our table with fresh drinks. You boys celebrating something? The end of a very long project, I said. The kind with a happy ending? The kind with an appropriate ending. She smiled and moved on to other customers. The bar was busier than usual for a Tuesday afternoon, filled with the kind of people who had stories to tell and time to tell them. I'd become something of a local legend over the past few weeks. The man who'd outmaneuvered his cheating wife and her lover using nothing but patience, documentation, and a thorough understanding of how the system worked. So, what's next? Shawn asked. Back to the corporate world? I'd been thinking about that question for days. My consulting business was doing well. Turned out that other people valued the same methodical approach that had served me so well in my personal crisis. I had more work than I could handle, all referrals from satisfied clients who appreciated dealing with someone who understood that details mattered. I think I'm done with corporate life, I said. Too many people like Harris and Nira playing games with other people's lives. Independent consulting has its advantages, especially when your reputation precedes you. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. I'd been getting a lot of strange messages since the story broke, but something made me check it. Mr. Braskin, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I was one of Harris-McCoy's previous victims. I wanted to thank you for what you did. Because of your investigation, I was able to get my job back and clear my name. You gave me my life back. I showed the message to Shawn, who read it and nodded approvingly. That's the 4th one this week. 4th what? 4th thank you message from one of Harris's victims. Word gets around. You've become something of a hero to people who thought they'd never get justice. I wasn't sure how I felt about being anyone's hero. I'd just been protecting myself, using the skills and resources available to me. But if other people had benefited from that protection, if other victims had found their voices because someone had finally connected the dots, that was something worth feeling good about. Outside, the December afternoon was crisp and bright, with the kind of clear sky that made everything look sharper and more defined. I walked to my car slowly, enjoying the feeling of having nowhere urgent to go and no lies to uncover. My house felt different now, larger, cleaner, more honest. I'd redecorated some rooms, thrown away reminders of a life that had been built on deception, kept only the things that belonged to the person I actually was, rather than the person I'd thought I was married to. The divorce had been finalized the week before, with terms that were exactly as harsh as I'd intended them to be. Nira had signed everything without argument, probably grateful that I hadn't pursued criminal charges against her personally. She'd moved to another state, taken a job with a small company that probably didn't know about her history. Starting over with nothing but the clothes she'd packed and the knowledge that her choices had consequences. I poured myself a drink, something good this time, something worth savoring, and sat in my living room, looking out at a neighborhood that felt like home again. Mrs. Wolcott was walking her dog past my house, and she waved when she saw me in the window. I waved back, part of a community that had watched my story unfold and approved of how it had ended. My phone rang. Shawn again. "Turn on Channel 8, he said. "You're going to want to see this." I found the remote and switched to the local news. The anchor was reading a story about corporate espionage, using Harris's case as an example of how small-town crimes could have national implications. They showed his photo, then moved on to a broader discussion of workplace security and the importance of protecting confidential information. Harris-McCoy's scheme affected dozens of companies and hundreds of employees across multiple states, the anchor said. But it was the careful documentation and methodical investigation by one of his victims that finally brought him to justice. This case serves as a reminder that sometimes the best defense against fraud is simply paying attention to the details. They didn't mention my name, but they didn't need to. Everyone who mattered already knew the story. I turned off the television and sat in the quiet of my reclaimed house, thinking about the past few months and the lessons they'd taught me, about trust and betrayal, about the difference between being smart and thinking you're smart, about the satisfaction that comes from seeing justice served methodically and completely. Nira had come home from her Christmas party smiling, confident that her lies were safe and her secrets were secure. She'd been wrong about that, just as she'd been wrong about so many other things. But I'd been wrong too. Wrong to trust without verifying, wrong to assume that love was enough to prevent betrayal, wrong to think that good intentions could protect me from people who had none. The difference was that I'd learned from being wrong. I'd adapted, investigated, documented, and acted. I'd turned my mistakes into education and my pain into purpose. And now, sitting in my honest house, on my honest street in my honest life, I could finally say that the education was complete. The smile was gone. The lies were exposed. The consequences were delivered. And I was free.